my name's Elizabeth Rogers, but my maiden name was Elżbieta Kirkor. That was my maiden name. Elżbieta is Elizabeth, and I was born in Warsaw, 6th of February 1938, just a year and a half before the Second World War broke out. And I don't remember anything of Poland because I was 1.5 when the war broke out. My family, my dad worked for the government, so we escaped with the government en masse, driving at night and hiding in forests during the daytime because the Germans were looking for us. And we escaped through Romania and then through northern Italy into France. And then when France fell in June of 1940, we were in Angers, by the way. We were in Angers, and my mother would take us to Les Sables d'Olonne. She loved swimming, so we'd go there. But then when France fell, we left in a great hurry from Bordeaux in a boat called the Madura. And we went up the west coast of France to the English Channel, and we had to zigzag. It was a Filipino boat, and they separated the men from the women. And my mother said it was touching because the Filipino sailors had very little rice, but what they had they shared with us because they saw we didn't have food with us. And so we had to zigzag because of the submarines, and we landed in Falmouth, England, and the first night they put us up on we had to sleep on the floor of a movie house. And from there we made our way somehow to London, and then Dad stayed in London because that's where the Polish government in exile was quartered, and for safety he sent us to Scotland, and I don't remember that either. And then from Scotland we took a Polish boat called the Stefan Batory to Halifax, Nova Scotia. And the funny thing is that I always thought we somehow ended up just in Montreal, but the reason I know now that it was Halifax was because the family of my nanny found me through Facebook about 2 years ago maybe. I got a message from a young woman with a very Scottish name like McGregor or something, not Polish at all, asking me whether I knew anything about the family named Kirkor. And I said, well, yes, I am a Kirkor. I'm Elizabeth Kirkor. My parents were Stanislav and Irene. And she wrote back saying, well, my grandmother was your nanny. So the nanny crossed the Atlantic with my mother because she saw that my mother wouldn't be able to cope. My mother, didn't really know she didn't know how to cook. She always had help, domestic help in Poland, so she didn't really know how to take care of us or what to do when one of us was ill. So the nanny said she'll cross over the Atlantic. This is now September, I think, 1940. So she said she'll cross the Atlantic and then go back to Europe. But she met a Polish Canadian. They fell in love. Staszewski was his name, I think. Her maiden name was Staszewska, and then she married. I've forgotten the name of the man she married. And anyhow, so there we are. And they found the document from that ship that lists all the passengers. And so they found the mother on that list. So anyhow, we spent a year or two in Montreal, and I have very, very vague memories. I just remember going through a wood. I don't know whom I was with, probably my mother, and this made a great impression on me because I'm an animal lover. And there was a horse. Somebody had fallen off a horse, and the horse was lying on the ground, and it had barbed wire around its neck. And people were trying to keep the horses as quiet as possible so that somebody could come and get some shears and clip off the barbed wire. So I remember that. And then I remember another thing, and this is definitely my own memory because my mother by then had a bad nervous breakdown, and she was in a hospital, and I was farmed out with one lady who had little twin boys, Felki, because Felix was the name of one, and so we called them the Felki, and my brother was farmed out with another lady. And I remember being in the playground, and somebody pushed my brother down the slide, and he went down so fast that when he left the slide, he hit his head on a concrete bench or something and was hurt. So I remember that. And I also remember a feeling of great injustice because I was farmed out with this lady. We called her Pani Mishka, Mrs. Mouse. I don't know why. She was a petite lady with dark hair. And her boys were very naughty. And at one point, they took some toys of mine. We were in an apartment, so we weren't on the ground floor, and they threw my toys out the window. And so when the mother came back and asked, you know, who did this, they pointed at me. So she took down a curtain rod and beat me with it. She gave me a spanking. And I'll never forget that. It was this terrible sense of injustice. I don't even remember if it hurt particularly, just the sense of injustice that I was blamed for something that I hadn't done. So those are some of my earliest memories. And then at some point, we went to Forest Hills, Long Island. And there I have a lot of memories, because by then I was maybe 3 or 4. And my mother, one summer, rented a house in Larchmont and put me in a nursery school. And I escaped from the nursery school and went home, and I was swinging, because this house had a swing in the backyard. And I was in this swing when the neighbor saw me and realized I should be at school. So I think he either took me or told my mother, somehow contacted my mother, and I was hauled back to school. So that's another of my early memories. But in general, I have very happy memories of being in America, Forest Hills, 7010 108th Street, Forest Hills, New York. And I went to Our Lady Queen of Martyrs, a Catholic school. My brother went there as well. For a while, he was in a boarding school in Canada, because the nuns there didn't want to let him go because he was such a good pupil. They didn't want to let him go. So he stayed in Canada longer, and then he joined us in Forest Hills. And we lived in a building called the Continental. It's no longer there. Well, there is a building called the Continental, but the new building took up the entire garden. We had a huge garden. The building had a main building and 2 wings. It was covered in Virginia creeper, which turned red in the autumn. And it was only like 4 or 5 stories tall. And it had a huge garden with little Victory Garden, beautiful trees. It was really a lovely place to grow up, and I liked the school, and I got on well. I was very happy there. And we went to a Catholic church very close to Our Lady Queen of Martyrs. And I remember there was a Jewish bakery right opposite, and I'd go there, and they had a machine that made dough, and it churned the dough, great big blade churned the dough, and they made bagels and matzos. And so my mother always bought bagels and matzos, even though we're not Jewish, but we're Polish, and so a lot of the food is similar. And I remember waiting for the bagels. And I remember I had a little gang of friends, and our great thrill was to go around with an alarm clock, and we'd set the alarm for like the next 2 or 3 minutes, and we'd put it on the front doorstep, and we'd hide in the bushes. And the poor homeowner would hear an alarm outside his or her door, and open the door and just find this alarm clock. I don't know how we retrieved the alarm clock, but that was a great, great thrill. What else do I remember? I remember going to the beach. I think it was I've got some photographs of me in Larchmont, in the Larchmont Beach Club, yeah. And then other photographs I've got of my brother and me in the ocean at the Rockaways. A friend of ours, Mr. Przedpowski, had a cottage somewhere in the Rockaways, and we'd go there. And my mother was an excellent swimmer. So she'd swim way out. She never swam parallel to the beach. She was a very strong swimmer. She swam the crawl. She just closed her eyes and just swam perpendicular to the beach, way out. And I'd be sitting on the beach waiting for her, and these people would come up to me and say, "Little girl, you know, what are you waiting for?" And I'd say, "Well, my mother's there swimming." And they'd look, and they couldn't see anybody because she wore a white cap, and you know the white caps blended with her white cap, and they just assumed that my mother had drowned. So sometimes people would sit next to me waiting, and then bit by bit they'd see this woman emerge from the waves, like Venus from the waves, the birth of Venus.